Happy Thursday, friends and family. Welcome to the Martin household. We are here again by the fire. Get your beverage, whatever that may be. This may have been a long week for some of us. And we are back with our good friend, Mr. Anonymous. And we are going to pick up a warning, chapter 3. Fake views. We must present to the world not just an America that's militarily strong, but an America that is morally powerful. An America that has a creed, a cause, a vision of a future time when all peoples have the right to self-government and personal freedom. I think American conservatives are uniquely equipped to present to the world this vision of the future, a vision worthy of the American past. That was Ronald Reagan. Hey everybody, how's everybody doing? Here we go. There is a tweet for everything, quote. That's a frequent eye-roll comment from the president's critics. They like to show how Trump takes one position and then a few years or even days later tweets out the 180-degree opposite opinion. It's now a common refrain for people inside his administration too, who both marvel at and curse the president's uncanny inability to stick to his guns. A cottage industry has cropped up around the phenomenon of his shifting views. One online entrepreneur created a small business out of it, President Flip-Flops. The web store literally sells sandals with a Trump tweet on the left shoe, contradicted by a Trump tweet on the right shoe, including gems such as his claim that the Electoral College was a disaster for a democracy, followed by an online post hailing the Electoral College as actually genius after he won the election. I need to figure out how to get these flip-flops in my life. His tweet citing an extremely credible source with rumors about Barack Obama, followed by a warning to his followers. Remember, don't believe, sources said. If they don't name the sources don't exist. Or his message urging the Obama administration, do not attack Syria because it would be very foolish, followed by a tweet praising our great military for doing so well in Syria in the Syria attack, which he ordered. The inconsistencies remind me of something a pollster friend once told me. She explained what she called the fact problem test. Hey, William. It was a simple way to determine whether a candidate's views were resonating with voters, creating a strong and trusted brand. Ronald Reagan was a high scorer. For instance, you could give a 1980s voter a fake political scenario about any major topic and then ask, what would Reagan's position be on this matter? X, Y, or Z? The voter would respond without hesitating, Z. Reagan communicated his views clearly and acted decisively, so people knew where he stood. Imagine voters receiving the same fact problem test for Donald Trump. What would Trump's position be on this matter, X, Y, or Z? Then you'd fill in whatever scenario you want, and let's say the issue was healthcare, abortion, trade with China, or guns. I pity the voter who would give a confident answer, because Trump has flip-flopped on all of them. Bye. My baby's leaving for the night. He repeatedly called for a full repeal of Obamacare as president and ripped Republicans in Congress for failing to deliver. Later, after hanging them out to dry, he said he didn't want a full repeal. He wanted to keep parts of it. He said he has long said he is pro-choice, but later while running for president, now he's so deeply pro-life that he believed there has to be some form of punishment for women who have abortions. Trump said China's government should be labeled a currency manipulator and held accountable. Then later, they're not currency manipulators. And then later, they were historic currency manipulators. He ranted that gun control legislation is not the answer, then toyed with the idea of supporting it as president, then got lectured by the NRA and backed away, then tweeted after shootings in Ohio and Texas about serious discussions with Congress on gun control legislation, then backed off his pronouncements again. I don't know about y'all, but we need to take a drink on that one. Every other minute, By the time you read this, the president may have flip-flopped on these issues several more times. The brilliant Abigail Adams, one of our earliest first ladies and a leader in her own right, once said, quote, "I've always felt that a person's intelligence is directly reflected by the number of conflicting points of view he can entertain simultaneously on the same topic," unquote. Donald Trump's problem is he never lands on a final position. His points of view are often in constant conflict and liable to change for no reason whatsoever, and certainly not from thoughtful deliberation. No president in recent history has come into the Oval Office with such a mishmash of ideas and opinions than its current occupant. Ideologically, the Trump White House is like an Etch-a-Sketch. Every morning, the president wakes up, shakes it, and draws something. It might be the same sketch as yesterday. Sometimes it's totally different or impossible to figure out. Nonetheless, he will call a top lieutenant to talk about his drawing. Now, you remember he was running around the White House with memes and pictures in his hand and running all over trying to get people's attention. Etch-a-Sketch. And the entire day will feel like a seance with officials huddling to the divine, the mysterious squiggly lines, and pretending they represent something meaningful. You remember the hurricane debacle where he had the marker and he's drawing all over. Like, I just imagine him running around the White House doing that. Should we care if a president doesn't really stand for anything with consistency? One who is so easily influenced by whomever he happens to speak to last, a cable show host, a member of Congress he likes, his daughter. A president's views on public issues are everything. The opinions he expresses inform the actions of his administration, congressional priorities, and most important of all, public support and trust. How can any of us be comfortable with a president having fake views, which change by the moment? This chapter is addressed to Republicans in particular. The GOP purports to be the party of principles, so you should be alarmed that our figurehead's philosophy is not stick to ideals, but to throw them at the wall and see what sticks. If his flip-flopping is any indication, he prioritizes convenience, not conviction. Add this to the list of absurdities inside the Trump administration, a list that's so long it makes the side effects on prescription drug commercials sound appealing by comparison. So he's throwing shade here at his own people and this lunatic. In fairness to the president, there's a lot of BS in government. People change direction with political winds all the time to make sure they're on the right side of an issue. They don't want to be out of step with the public or their base or their party. That's politics. Sometimes it's actually admirable when a leader considers new information and adjusts preconceived views. That is not Donald Trump. He changes his views without explanation, yet somehow convinces diehard Republicans that he possesses a fixed set of beliefs and an ideology when he does not. He is saying he is playing them, y'all, us. He is playing folks. They expect he will be unfailingly loyal to their causes when he will not. Trump defenders are bound to disagree. Some have proclaimed him the greatest president since Reagan, while others striving for the preposterous have called him the best since Lincoln. He encourages the comparison. Wow, highest poll numbers in the history of the Republican Party, he tweeted in July of 2018. That includes honest Abe Lincoln and Ronald Reagan. There must be something wrong. Please recheck that poll. This is the same man who proudly declared on the White House lawn, "I am the chosen one." Gesturing knowingly toward the heavens in front of a gaggle of reporters, he said he was teasing, but he wasn't. Such is the self-perception of Donald J. Trump. Well, we don't have to be in the White House to know that. I mean, you can watch that, you can read his tweets, that's a given. The funny part is that people actually believe that there's something behind all of that, and there is not. Supporters cite a host of conservative victories under Trump, from judicial appointments to regulatory changes. Admittedly, on these points, they have a case. He has advanced a number of conservative goals in a way thought unimaginable before his election. Consider the Supreme Court, which has a stronger conservative bench, or the burdensome red tape that has been slashed on his watch to the relief of American businesses. Add to it the changes to our insane tax code, which have put more money in Americans' pockets. Alas, these successes often had little to do with the president's leadership. Those are the people around him. The credit usually belongs to Republicans in Congress or top aides to the president who have persuaded him to stick with the program. That just means they had the best meme and he jumped on that train. That has really nothing to do with him. When he goes wobbly on issues, GOP leaders stage late night or unplanned interventions, usually by phone. I remember the morning he woke up and tweeted about the controversial vote set to take place in Congress on renewing the National Security Agency's foreign wiretapping authorities. The president railed against the spy powers. He declared they were used to so badly surveil and abuse the Trump campaign. We were blindsided. Up until that moment, the administration had been enthusiastically supporting the bipartisan legislation. The president's flippant remarks threw the future of the bill and crucial national security tools into doubt. Livid Republican leaders phoned the White House to explain the legislation. The president clearly didn't understand, they said. The NSA spy tools were used to go after bad guys, not to monitor domestic political campaigns. Internally, there was a full court press to get Trump to walk back his earlier comments. 2 hours later, he did, tweeting favorably about the bill. We need it. Get smart. Without these interventions, many times Donald Trump would have wandered into the political wilderness far from the Republican camp. It can take a while to get him to come around. His fear of disappointing the base most consistently keeps him in check. In the above case, the president definitely didn't want the GOP to see him as weak on national security, which is why he reversed himself. Go ahead, Rodney. Because the base will not matter to Trump if he's reelected in 2020. So here's the thing. Once he gets, and if he were to get reelected, what the Republicans have to realize is like, he's not sticking to guns because he actually believes something or cares about y'all. He's sticking to them because he thinks it's going to make him win. Once he sees a win, he's out. And he's going to toss whatever policy you're talking about, whatever policy you're talking about, and he's going to go for the bottom line. And unless your bottom line agrees with his, you're going to have some sort of problem. So people really need to be rethinking at this point, like, do we want to keep supporting this guy who's not reading or has a clue what's really going on? Or actually take this time to jump ship and really get someone in line with what's really going on and knows how to read. Can we get somebody who knows how to read? I'm sorry. All right, the grand old party. Like the rest of the country, members of the Republican Congress didn't take Donald Trump seriously at first. But as he gained steam, they went from agitated to petrified. I don't even believe that, because they will ride him and hold him and caress him like nobody's business. No one was more concerned than House Speaker Paul Ryan. You remember Paul Ryan? Yeah, he's gone. He said he's had enough of that. Ryan once pledged to transform the GOP from a party of opposition under 8 years of President Obama to a party of proposition, as he put it, churning out conservative ideas for fixing America. He spent months crafting new policy proposals, from fighting poverty to fixing healthcare, that he hoped would be embraced by the Republican nominee in 2016. Then Donald Trump showed up. With the New York businessman on a glide path to clinching the nomination, the speaker adjusted course. He was unsure whether the candidate was a real conservative. Would Trump support Republican policies or sell them all down the river once he was elected? His record showed he was more of a political opportunist than anything. I'm glad he said it. Ryan called the closed-door meeting of his colleagues. They had to box in Donald Trump with their soon-to-be-published GOP agenda. Every elected Republican needed to promote it, he said, which would send a clear message to the candidate. If you win this election, this is the party you will be leading, and this is what it stands for. Don't buck us. As one attendee later retold the story, Ryan looked at his colleagues across his table and said with total assurance, "This is the Trump inoculation plan." That's funny. The Grand Old Party got its nickname just after the Civil War, an honorific meant to acknowledge its roles in saving the Union and ending slavery. The party was founded on the idea that government's role in society should be limited and the freedom of the people should be maximized. The federal bureaucracy had responsibility in certain areas, they believed, trade relationships and national defense amongst them. But most power should devolve to the states and the people themselves. Remember when people had a say in things and it wasn't all closed doors and weird parties and people, and actually people cared what the citizens think? The GOP foundations were built on what is known as classical liberalism. Before liberal was a term associated with Democrats, it meant something very different. And we know, if you do history, the parties and the names, those all kind of switch back and forth. And depending at what point in history each party was representing a little something different over the years. The GOP's foundations were built on what is known as classical liberalism. It developed over 100 years. In a nutshell, it posited that people should be allowed to conduct their lives however they wanted, as long as they didn't violate someone else's liberty. Government existed for the sole purpose of preserving freedom and protecting people from each other. Anything beyond that was government overreach. It became a central belief of classic liberals that individuals are far better positioned to make their own decisions than government is for them. The more control they have over their lives, the more prosperous their societies will be. Whatever else came to be associated with the GOP, these beliefs were at its core. It is the party's heritage. That was the idea anyway. Like any group, the Republican Party has evolved. Sometimes it has been more populist, reacting to the whims of the people and supporting a broader sphere of government action in society, and other times more libertarian, veering closer to a strict interpretation of its founding principles of limited government. When Donald Trump came into the GOP scene, party leaders were concerned about whether he supported or even understood, there it is, the conservative movement. And with good reason. Over the last 3 decades, Trump has changed his political party registration 5 times. He has been a member of the Independence Party, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, a registered independent, and then he decided he was a Republican again. I doubt during any of these switches that he did much studying up on the philosophical identity of each group. We know that answer. GOP members had a right to be circumspect. In 2004, Trump confessed to CNN, quote, "In many cases, I probably identify more as a Democrat." In 2007, he praised Hillary Clinton and said Hillary's always surrounded herself with very good people, adding, "I think Hillary would do a good job as president." Incredibly, as a Republican presidential candidate in 2015, Trump again repeated that he identified as a Democrat on key issues like the economy. In the years up to that point, he donated to the biggest Democrats at all levels of government: Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Anthony Weiner, John Kerry, and Harry Reid. He gave money to Andrew Cuomo, Terry McAuliffe, and Eliot Spitzer. It was only after he started to get serious about running for president as a Republican that he gave money primarily to Republican candidates. See, he was running a job to become a Republican for years. And that's been documented with Steve Bannon and some other TV producers that were trying to produce him into becoming the Republican nominee. Trump is not the only president in the modern era to have switched sides. Ronald Reagan famously changed from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party, but the change was driven by principle, and the change stuck. He didn't sway back and forth again and again. It would be tough for anyone to claim Donald Trump flipped parties on principle like Reagan. Well, first, in order to say that, you'd have to identify what principle, and that right there would kind of full stop. Some have sought to dig into Trump's ideological evolution, figuring out what changed or who inspired him to become a Republican. I'll spare them the needless waste of effort. Donald Trump became a conservative when it became politically convenient for him. I have no doubt he would have become the rising star of the Democratic Party too, if that looked like a shorter path to the Oval Office. Either way, he did with his belief system what he did with any Trump product. He outsourced it for low-cost manufacturing to someone else and then slapped his name on it. A handful of hired minions gave him the bare bones requirements of a conservative platform, and he covered it with gaudy gold plating to make it his own. This realization of a wolf in elephant's clothing dawned on the Republican commentators one by one during the 2016 primaries. The most prominent defenders of the conservative faith warned the rest of the GOP that Trump was an apostate. David McIntosh, the head of the Conservative Club for Growth, said the candidate was not a free market conservative. Rush Limbaugh blasted Trump support for bloated entitlement programs, engaging in a rhetorical back and forth with himself on the air. Can someone point me to the conservative on the ballot? What do you mean, Rush? Are you admitting Trump is not a conservative? Dang right I am. The late columnist Charles Kruthammer wrote, Trump has no affinity whatsoever for the central thrust of modern conservatism, a return to less and smaller government. I had my own misgivings like any of them. I watched as Trump spent more time mocking other candidates than he did on substance. The debates became little more than schoolyard brawls when he jumped in. And when he did talk about what he stood for, it was often anathema to GOP principles. From his views on socialized medicine to a large federal role in education, I was especially concerned and surprised by Trump's views on the economy, which were far more interventionist than the policies the Republican Party had been promoting in recent years. Donald Trump was not coming off as a conservative because he wasn't. That's why Republicans tried to erect ideological roadblocks to his nomination by pointing out the candidate's sharp deviations from the GOP platform. And you remember when they were trying to decide on a nominee, all the other candidates were like, hey guys, he's not even what we all purport to stand for, even in the least. Like, why are we even entertaining this? And we still ask that question. Those roadblocks did little to stop a man who wasn't driving on the same road. Pause. That's beautiful. Those roadblocks did little to stop a man who wasn't driving on the same road. He won primary after primary. Speaker Ryan went forward with his backup option, releasing a platform designed to lock the nominee into accepting Republican orthodoxy. Trump largely ignored that too and plowed on toward Election Day victory. The Republicans' inoculation plan failed. Indeed, it never stood a chance. The next section, the wolf in elephant's clothing. With the full powers of the executive office of the president, Donald Trump has turned the GOP into a mess of contradictions. He confounds party leaders daily with errant statements and conflicting positions, but his actions on the topics nearest and dearest to the GOP, the size of government, national defense, economic policy, are what is most noteworthy. On balance, the president's handling of those issues has been a net negative for the party and the country. Now, this is, again, his person saying that on balance, taking everything into consideration, they're at a negative, even though they're promoting and telling everybody who will listen that, oh, we're just doing great things, everything's great, the country's great, the economy's great, healthcare is great, but it's not. And this guy's even saying, like, from inside, the handling of those issues has been a net negative, meaning when it's all counted out, we are in the red. Big, beautiful government. For all President Trump's talk these days about Democrats trying to make America socialist, the reality is he's the king of the big government. The federal bureaucracy is just a large, centralized the federal bureaucracy is just as large, centralized, careless with spending, and intrusive under Donald Trump as it was when Barack Obama was in office. In many cases, it's bigger. This is an uncomfortable truth for Trump supporters. Rather than hew to traditional conservative beliefs about a limited federal role, Trump has allowed government to balloon. He's especially vexed when we inform him the government will never be large enough or powerful enough to execute his spontaneous propositions. The U.S. federal budget deficit was actually declining under the Obama administration. Ding, 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 ding. From $1.4 trillion in 2009 when Obama took office to $587 billion in 2016. 1.4 trillion to 587 billion just before he left. Credit for the remarkable downward trend goes to Congressional Republicans who forced a standoff with the White House in 2011. So they're saying during Obama's time that the credit should go to the the Republicans for the downward trend in the debt. They demanded a budget deal which would bring the deficit under control. The result was the Budget Control Act, a law that slashed federal spending, put strict limitations on future expenditures, and placed a cap on the government's credit card. It was considered the conservative Tea Party movement's crowning achievement. So that's another thing to think about, right? Like when a president picks up after another president, you're still picking up whatever direction things are going, right? So when the economy and everyone's super excited about the economy, think about that. If Obama's here and then Trump jumps on the train, it's already moving, or this way, moving up. So you can't really take credit for something that it sounds like, according to this guy, if you look back at it, this was being dealt with in 2011, where they were actually using politics in Congress in the methods and manners in which it's supposed to be used, right? Working, strategizing, going back and forth, compromising, negotiating, and then coming up with plans that actually reduce debt and increase the things that we need. Donald Trump was not interested in penny pinching. He may try to project the image of a man working to save taxpayer dollars, and it's true that he can be talked out of stupid ideas if they cost too much, but that's not because he's trying to save money so he can go back to the American people. He still wants to spend the money, just on things in which he's personally interested, such as bombs or border security. Trump recoils at people who are cheap. Today, he is sparing no expense on the management of the executive branch, spending so freely it makes the money-burning days of the Trump organization look like the $5 tables at a Vegas casino. As a result, the budget deficit has increased every single year since Donald Trump took office, returning to dangerous levels. The president is on track to spend $1 trillion above what the government takes in annually. So every time you hear everything's great, the economy's great, we're just doing so great in money, no. Because when the bottom line, when it all gets added and subtracted and balanced out, we are $1 trillion under what we bring in, income versus expense. Just look at 2019. The president proposed a record-breaking $4.7 trillion budget. That's how much he suggested the federal government spend in a single year. Since Trump took office, the U.S. debt, much of which we owe to other countries that we borrow from them, has grown by the trillions to another all-time high of $22 trillion total. To pay off our debts today, according to one estimate, each taxpayer in the United States would need to fork over an average of $400,000. This should set off fiscal tornado sirens across America. We cannot keep borrowing money we can't pay back. Otherwise, our children will owe a steep and terrible price. And that's something to think about, because one of the things that's always touted is, it's such great policies and the economy is doing so well. We really need to think about and read and focus on the numbers and what they truly mean. And there's a lot of information out about that. But I like the way he did that succinctly. The president also decided to throw the old spending limits out the window. He didn't want to be holding a credit card that would easily max out. So in a deal cut with Nancy Pelosi, he effectively scrapped the conservatives' treasured Budget Control Act and increased spending limits by more than $300 billion annually, adding another $2 trillion to America's debt over the next decade. It's difficult to capture the significance of this reversal. If President Obama had hatched a similar plan with a GOP House Speaker, Republicans would have been livid. Conservatives should view this as a complete and utter betrayal. Trump promised to do the opposite on federal spending. Well, the problem is that the news and the people are telling them otherwise. That's the problem. If you look at any of the news channels that feed Republicans primarily, they're telling them that everything's great. And they're not going to do any further research into it. And anything else that comes to them, they say, that's this, that's liberal, that's Democrat, this is that, instead of it just being factual. So he's convinced them they don't have to listen to anything, so they won't know what this guy, who's one of his guys, is saying. They should view this as a complete and utter betrayal as a Republican. Trump promised to do the opposite on federal spending. During the presidential campaign, he said he would eliminate America's debt during his time in office. That's right, eliminate it. He said he would eliminate it. How was he going to repay trillions in debt during such a short window was never fully explained. But that didn't matter because it wasn't true. He said it to appease worried conservatives and to assure them that he was one of them, a budget hawk who wanted to cut spending. More fake views. Now remember, if you also Google his financial bottom lines and issues with all of his companies, it'll clearly show that all of his casinos, his colleges, his 501c3, the Trump Foundation, everything is gone. Now, when we say gone, some of it has been dissolved, but when you look at it, between the suits that have been filed against it and its actual liquidity, it's questionable. So it's not shocking that he doesn't know how to run a government, because that's how he runs his businesses until he gets knocked out. Astoundingly, instead of a mutiny against President Trump, GOP congressmen whistled past the graveyard as they went to cast their votes on his disastrous budget deal, proving yet again that Trump has a Darth Vader chokehold on weak-willed Republicans. That's deep. That's deep. He has a Darth Vader chokehold on weak-willed Republicans. And I think that's why he decided to choose the Republican Party, because he had to decide, which party can I play the most, right? Which one is going to allow me to say the right things and jump on the train, and they're going to stand behind me. And he was right. He chose the right party. Crazy. Donald Trump, and in fact, that offends me as a person that has voted Republican. I don't claim to be either, but I voted both Democrat and Republican. And if you are a staunch Republican that just holds on to it with your flags and all your stuff, that should offend you. that even your people are saying he chose you because he could play you. Donald Trump has America back on the road to bankruptcy, an area where he has unparalleled expertise for a president of the United States. The small band of fiscal conservatives who remain in the Trump administration warned the president about the eventual dangers of his out-of-control spending addiction. In one such meeting, Trump reportedly said, "Yeah, but I won't be here." I have never heard him say those words, but it doesn't come as a surprise. That's how he thinks. What does he care if the federal government goes belly up? By then, it won't be his problem. Because you understand, he's convinced people that he's just one of them. But trust me when I say he is not going to be one of them with his suspenders working out in a factory somewhere in the backwoods when this whole thing goes belly up. He is going to be in another country, probably Russia, kicking it. He's going to be sitting somewhere on whatever he set aside and whatever he scraped off the top in every area that he possibly could. So he is not one of them. He doesn't care what's going to happen. And ultimately, at some point, he's either going to decide to bounce and just resign totally, or he's going to get kicked out, or he's going to eventually get voted out in one way or another. But either way, he is not going to care about the next person coming behind him. Also, when we talk about leadership styles, that is a huge leadership principle. The notion of modeling behavior that you would leave something better than when you entered it. Right? So when you enter a room, we always tell our children, you leave the room better than when you entered it. That definitely goes for an entire society, government, and office. You leave it better than when you entered it. But when you're dealing with someone that doesn't really care, I just feel for the person that has to come behind him, because no matter what, you're going to be cleaning up an absolute mess. Trump also promised on the campaign trail to slash the bloated federal workforce. That too appears to have been a head fake. The number of government employees that hasn't shrunk much at all under Donald Trump. In fact, as of the second half of 2019, the federal workforce was on the rise again to its largest level since the end of the Obama administration. The president hasn't made the issue a priority in his engagement with Congress, despite countless opportunities to bring it up in budget negotiation. Trump has worked hard in the meantime to make the executive branch even more active, not less. While he's cut regulation, he's also issued a flurry of executive orders to bypass Congress and its elected representatives. Trump attacked Obama for doing the same, calling it a basic disaster and undemocratic. We have a president that can't get anything done, so he just keeps signing executive orders all over the place, he said. Why is Barack Obama constantly issuing executive orders that are major power grabs of authority? That was before Trump himself took office. Now he issues orders at rates rivaling his Democratic predecessors. In his first 3 years, Bill Clinton issued 90 executive orders. In the same period, Barack Obama issued 110. Donald Trump issued 120 before his third year was over. The Trump administration is not a rewarding place for a fiscal conservative to work. Our attempts to get the president to care have mostly failed. Saving money is usually boring to him. When he gets interested in ending what he determines are wasteful programs, which for him are very specific initiatives like environmental projects he's been told about, or dollars sent to a country he's angry with, he doesn't understand why the initiatives cannot be stopped with a finger snap. He has to work with Congress, but that's too much effort. A few of us held out hope that as another election rolled around, he'd get more interested in reducing spending and runaway agency budgets in order to satisfy conservatives. Well, he doesn't have to satisfy them. He's going to get the numbers regardless. That's what's so funny. He's figured out, he's like, I don't have to do a single thing. I can lie, make up stuff, do exactly what I want, and no one is going to say anything. Instead, he made a quick deal with Speaker Pelosi because it was easier and it gave him more cash. The Callis trade was a tombstone placed atop our budget balancing daydreams. For a man who loves big things, Trump wanted his government the same. This should not be a surprise. It really shouldn't be a surprise. Indefensible defense. On defense and Homeland Security, the story appears better on the surface. The president has increased military spending, albeit at the cost of heaping piles of debt. He is focused on modernizing U.S. forces and raising pay for our troops, and he has made securing the country and the border one of the highest priorities of his presidency. In reality, Trump has been a disaster for the Pentagon. He refers to the leaders of the military not as nonpartisan defenders of the republic, but as his generals, whom he can move around as he pleases, like knights on a chessboard. It's tough to listen to him talk like this. Some of the leaders have lost children in the defense of this nation. They have answered the knock at the door from men and women standing there to tell them the most heart-wrenching news a parent can hear, that their child is gone forever. Yet they are on the receiving end of orders barked by a man who cowered at the thought of military service. The patriots who are still in uniform will not come out and say it because they don't want to openly disagree with their commander-in-chief. But many are appalled by Trump's lack of decorum and his imprudent leadership of the armed forces. Time and time again, he has put our armed forces in a terrible position by trying to pull the military into political debates or using it to demonstrate his own toughness. This began before he entered office. As a candidate, Trump suggested the military and intelligence agencies embrace torture as a tactic against America's enemies, vowing, "I would bring back waterboarding, and I will bring back a hell of a lot worse than waterboarding." Analysts pointed out that such statements are used by terrorists for propaganda, helping them recruit supporters by touting America's supposed cruelty. It feeds their narrative, putting U.S. forces in danger overseas. Fortunately, the president was persuaded to drop the subject early in his term by the incoming team, who realized Trump's flip-flopping would impact national defense most of all. So this is direct impact to people who are on the front lines. What locals and foreign nationals and people who are in other countries and the people that we work with, our allies, what they perceive and believe about us will come directly from not only the soldiers and the airmen and the Marines on the ground, but from our leadership. And so what they're saying here is that basically that ISIS and those that want to do harm to us are using our own words against us. The damage the president has done to our security is a consequence of his terrible foreign policy choices, an area where Trump's instincts are so backwards that we will devote an entire chapter to addressing them. For now, take Iran as an example. President Trump took office eager to meet face-to-face with Iran's leaders, who run one of the most anti-American governments in the world. Anytime they want, he said, no preconditions. This is something a U.S. president has never done, and for good reason. Iran's government has the blood of American soldiers on its hands. They are responsible for the deaths of hundreds of U.S. troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. Giving them an audience with the leader of the free world would put them on an equal footing and be priceless media fodder for their use back home. It would also demonstrate to Iranian descendants that America was embracing the brutal regime, not opposing it. Donald Trump didn't care or understand about any of that, and military leaders' stomachs churned at the president's offer. Then Trump's views began to change. He witnessed Iran's hostile behavior and recognized appeasement wasn't the best course of action. His internal pendulum swung hard in the other direction. After Iran shot down an American surveillance drone in June 2019, the president wanted a super muscular response. Pentagon officials warned against escalation with Tehran, but Trump reportedly called for a military strike anyway. When warplanes were in the air 10 minutes out from the target, he apparently decided to call it off, caving to the advice of skeptics, including Fox News host Tucker Carlson. Only a few weeks later, the pendulum swung again. He was back to suggesting to aides that he might sit down with Iran's leaders in face-to-face meetings, which many of us believed would be a colossal mistake. Trump teased with the possibility of a G7 meeting in France. When Trump's flip-flopping is almost something like new army uniforms, very expensive, he once lamented, but on the other hand, beautiful. It is exhausting. When it's about airstrikes, it's terrifying. The president's impetuousness poses a danger to our military, the full extent of which will not be known for years. He is more than a minor headache for the Pentagon. He is a blinding migraine. Those who have served at the highest levels of the Pentagon, who have sat with Trump in moments of decision, know all too well. On a weekly basis, they shield men and women in uniform from the knowledge, as best they can, of just how undisciplined the commander-in-chief is above them and how he treats the U.S. military like it's part of a big game of battleship. Our warriors risk everything to venture into the darkest corners of the world to hunt those who would do us harm. They deserve better for their inviolable code of duty than a man lacking a basic moral compass. It's scary how we, his appointees, have become accustomed to this. I once walked out of a meeting with the president, and a visibly shaken briefer, who was new to the Trump circus, pulled me aside. "Are you kidding me?" he remarked. Moments earlier, Trump expressed a spur-of-the-moment reversal about a military mission. He wanted to go in another direction, and his change of heart was followed by a presidential order to act straight away. "What should we do?" the briefer asked nervously. "He wants us to scrap everything the agency was planning." "Relax," I assured him. "We aren't going to do anything. I swear he'll change his mind tomorrow." Right? And you know, with like little kids, if you take the toy away and you give them another toy, they'll forget about the first toy by the morning time. So that's the methods and the strategies they're having to apply here, is like, how do we deal with toddlers, basically, who have their hand on buttons that affect people's lives? I was wrong. The president changed his mind later that afternoon. Then there is Homeland Security. For conservatives, this is a subset of defense and the government's overall obligation to protect its citizens. For President Trump, it's a centerpiece of his agenda. He ran on the promise to bring the border under control and to support agents on the front lines. Of all the random issues he brings up unprompted in meetings and events, the award for the biggest Trump non sequitur goes to the wall. It's a running joke in the White House that one of the worst jobs in the administration belongs to the poor souls charged with designing the president's border wall. Trump, of course, talks about the wall all the time with a gleam in his eye. Running for president, he vowed that he would build a great wall. Nobody builds walls better than me, believe me, and I build them very inexpensively, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words. He admonished rival candidate Jeb Bush for talking about border fencing. It's not a fence, Jeb, it's a wall, and there's a big difference. I have to admit it, it's knee-slappingly hilarious to watch Trump tackle this issue. In late 2015, he said his wall would be made of hardened concrete, rubber, and steel. At one point in 2017, he proposed that the wall will be solar-powered to generate clean electricity. A month later, he said, you have to be able to see through it. The wall was no longer a concrete slab, but a steel wall with openings. Then the wall became artistically designed steel slats. Then, in 2018, the president claimed he could have a steel wall, or it could be a steel fence, but it will be more powerful than any of the concrete walls that we're talking about. At the end of 2018, he said, an all-concrete wall was never abandoned, as been reported by the media, only to tweet less than a week later, we are now planning a steel barrier rather than concrete. Midway through 2019, he flipped again, touting the brand new high steel and concrete wall that he'd already built and previewed that there was much more to come. Officials would come out of meetings on the subject looking like they'd stepped off the gravitron of the county fair. The president was constantly changing the design, 10 feet high or 50 feet high, electric, not electric. He couldn't make up his mind, officials complained. They were pulling their hair out in frustration. Trump's shifting preference in aesthetics seemed to be matched only by shifting explanations for the construction timeline. At various times, Trump told us construction was underway. Then he said Democrats were stopping the wall from being built altogether. Then that Congress needed to act. Then that his critics were wrong and so much wall was being built. Then that courts were standing in the way. And then, never mind all of that about Congress and the courts, he could build it alone and we'll have the whole border sealed up by the end of 2020. Here's the truth. Trump has barely built any wall, and his policies have been a thoroughfare when it comes to border security. By all accounts, most of what the president has built is replacement of old fences at the border. If there are really hundreds of miles of new wall on the way, as he nervously promises voters, experts say it still won't solve the problem. Even with a giant concrete wall or steel fence or concrete steel wall fence across the entire border, migrants can still come to our border and file for protected status. Then they are let into the United States for years, where their cases are reviewed. That is what Republicans begged Trump to address. But instead of using his political capital to fix the broken laws, he fixated on one of his favorite pastimes, a construction project. The result is that the system will remain broken well past his presidency. And in the process of bungling border security, Donald Trump has obliterated America's reputation as a nation of immigrants. This is a deeply Republican, conservative, classical liberal conception that the United States is a refuge for those seeking a better life. Such was the condition of the Republic at the moment of its founding and ever since. Well, I wish they would tell their people that, because I appreciate that that's what he thinks the Republican Party stands for, and that's the Republican Party that I used to support, but I will tell you that is not the Republican Party of today. From the heart and soul to what is being said through their mouths, through what the media looks like, to the things that they're chanting and wanting to do. So I wish they would all figure that out, because that's not the Republican Party today. The United States was molded by people who left home in faraway places, by idealistic risk takers and hard workers who fought the odds to reach a liberal new world. Our republic was not rooted in blood and soil. It was rooted in a shared aspiration for a fresh start. However, not being a man of history, Trump never adopted this view. Now, I do not agree that our republic was not rooted in blood and soil. I believe it definitely was. And it was the blood and the soil of the people that were here and the people that were stolen and brought here. Now, this version of this, I do agree that it should be a place of refuge and immigrants, but it definitely is a place where there's blood in the soil. You can believe that. Okay. So however, Trump not being a man of history, Trump never adopted this view. A shocked aide walked out of a meeting in the Oval Office one day, came to my office and recounted an anecdote about a conversation with the president. They'd been meeting on another topic when Trump off-roaded into a tangent about immigration, complaining about the number of people crossing the border. We get these women coming in with like 7 children, he told his listeners, briefly attempting a Hispanic accent. They are saying, oh, please help, my husband left me. They are useless. They don't do anything for our country. At least if they came in with a husband, we can put him in the fields to pick corn or something. The handful of attendees in the room shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, but said nothing. That's the bigger problem. The aide reported. They didn't even know what to say. That's most of the people around him because they know all this is going on. This is how the President of the United States thinks and speaks about people who give their lives and sometimes do to reach America. Whenever these quotes find their way to the press, a mid-level communication staffer is dispatched to say Trump was joking. I assure you, he isn't. No matter what his supporters will tell you, no matter what some appointees will try to convince you of, Donald Trump is anti-immigrant. He might be in a meeting about missile defense, but inside he is probably thinking about his wall, about shutting down immigration to the United States, about the Mexicans. Of the latter, he said, quote, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people. Imagine how that makes an entire population of Mexican Americans feel. I'm glad he at least admits it. Sadly, you hear little repudiation of Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric from his Homeland Security officials, who appear to be living in a dazed state of Stockholm syndrome. This is like pot calling the kettle black, Mr. Anonymous, because you sitting right up in it and you writing a book. Now, granted, he's giving away all this money for this book to charity, but ultimately, you are sitting right in there and not saying a single thing, and then judging the people who are also not saying a single thing. The president has also weighed the idea of dropping the number of foreign refugees admitted to the United States, which tend to be people fleeing persecution from poor non-white countries, down to 0. Yes, you read that correctly. 0, zilch, nada. He already slashed the number to historic lows. In the meantime, he's announced a host of tight restrictions on potential new immigrations, including the imposition of a wealth test. I wonder if in all his years in New York, Trump ever saw the words at the base of the Statue of Liberty, which read in part, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. If he did, it didn't mean anything to him. Well, you know he didn't read, and he definitely didn't read those words. The bottom line for Republicans is this. The United States can have an open door without having open borders. But we cannot preserve the country we love by slamming that door in the faces of those who most aspire to join our nation. All right, y'all, we're going to stop there for now. Anyway, happy Thursday. One of the things that just occurred to me in this section that we just read is the importance of not being silent in the midst of uncomfortable conversations. So you may find yourself at work, at school, at home, around Thanksgiving, Christmas tables, and there are some things that are being said, like the things in this book. And it's so important at an individual level, family level, professional level, to deal with those types of ideologies and mindsets, and pray about ways that you can say something when you need to say something, and have the courage to stand in your convictions and the courage to stand up for other people. Because ultimately that's something that is what this country is. This is a place of refuge, a place of new beginnings, and a place that has a history that is loaded with the blood in the soil of many, many people. And we can never lose that. And we have to all carry that inside of us and stand up for one another. So I just encourage you all, wherever you're at and whatever arenas you find yourself in, find ways to say something, to not be silent, because too many people now are being silent. Too many people are feeding on words that are coming from unsubstantiated places, and we need to say something and not be the people that are silent. So when our children ask us in the future, grandchildren, family members ask, oh, during that time, what did you say? What did you do? You can say that you were not silent. So anyway, I love y'all. Hope everybody's doing well. This is all for tonight. All right, y'all. Take care. Peace.